be talking about career change resumes and how that looks, what that means, some strategies around that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about long tenures and what do you do if someone's been at the same company for a long time? How do you format their resume in a way that shows their growth and their progression and their continuous learning, which we know is important to recruiters today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about ageism and some strategies that we can use to really address ageism in resumes. So that's where we're headed today. I'd love for you to say hello and drop a chat in the chat, where whatever platform you're joining us on. Let us know that you're here, and we'd love to hear your questions and thoughts as we go through. Tell me where you're joining me from, and I'd love to hear from you. So let's dive in here. And again, we're on our Trend Tuesday lives, and Trend Tuesday is really about bringing you the now, the new, and the next in careers. And what does that mean for our work and for making sure we're delivering the best possible results for our clients? If you are listening and you're watching us live, that's great. Drop me a comment. If you're watching the replay, you can put a hashtag replay in there. And if you want to go back and watch this later, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got all of our videos on our YouTube channel, and we're putting out some new videos once a week there as well. So we look forward to seeing you here every Tuesday live or on our YouTube channel. So let's dive in. Today we're going to talk about career change foundations, like what's underneath all of that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies and look at some samples. And then we'll look at some additional samples looking at the long tenures as well as ageism strategies for dealing with, potential bias that our clients might face if they're above 40. I think the data is that if you're above 40 now, you can experience ageism. So glad to see you. Thank you everyone for joining me. Hi, Michelle. It's good to see you. Hi, Lisa and Marie. Marla, love to see you, Marla. Excellent. Thanks for joining us. So let's dive in here a little bit and look at our thoughts for the career change foundations. What does that mean, and how do we help clients walk through the basics of this career change? And I'm going to ask you a question here in a minute. So get ready. If you're watching me, we're going to ask you a question here in a minute. So here's our model that we have, helping people get really clear on their career goal. Because if you don't have a clear goal for your resume, it's just like kind of shoving the magnets at the fridge and nothing's going to stick from 10 feet away, right? We need to have a focus. We need to be able to walk up to our target and really intentionally place that magnet on the whiteboard or on the fridge, right? We've got an option to be intentional when we're focused. And that's what we want to help clients do. So I recommend that we get focused in these 4 areas. What do you want to do, right? That's the role, that's the title, the where do you want to work? That's the lingo, that's the culture, that's the keywords that we're going to have in the resume that aren't necessarily skill-based, but are related to the industry or the specific company. Then why? That's going to be the juicy pieces that connect the dots. Some of it might be in a cover letter, but we do want some of that in a summary, and even in some of our bullet points, the how that we talk about for our clients should think about their style, their philosophy. That should be worked into their stories. That kind of fits into both the why and the how. What makes you qualified, but also what is your style? How do you show up? What makes you different? So those are the 4 areas. So I wanted you to drop in the chat. What do you see people struggle with the most to get clarity here? 1, 2, 3, or 4. What do they struggle with the most when they're looking to get clarity? Do they struggle with the what? Do they struggle with where? The why, kind of connecting those dots? Or do they struggle just trying to apply for jobs they're not really qualified for? That would be number 4 there in the how. So drop that in the chat for me. What do you see people struggling with the most when they are going to try to get focused? I love to see what you think there, the what, where, why, and how. Where do people struggle the most when they're trying to get focused? So if they're not focused, the resume becomes about where I have been instead of where I'm going. And this is true for every job seeker, but even more important for a career changer. Now, career change might be, a role change. It might be an industry change, right? There's a lot of different things that get shoved into that category. And we're going to talk about a few different ways that looks. But if we're making that transition, we really have to think about all of these pieces and how am I getting focused? All right, so you're saying where, what people struggle with, the why, the what and the where, how, love it, some whys, some what's, great, thank you for sharing that. So how can we help them get that clarity in where they're going? So this is where I start with my career changers. And it's not the exploration part, right? The exploration part happens over here. We get that done. We get some focus areas down, and we can do this with 2, maybe 3 different focus areas. But once they start to get some focus areas, now we switch from what do they want to what is the employer looking for. I always ask my clients to find job descriptions that they're targeting. And I've seen some people writing, kind of poo-pooing this idea, but I want my clients, one, to show me that they're focused by sending me 3 job descriptions that are at least in the same family, right? And then I'm going to go through and get an idea of what are the main qualifications that are being sought by those, et cetera. Now, if I'm working with an upper level job seeker where job descriptions are not out there for a C-level role, right? They won't need that. They will come in and we'll kind of start right in with the analyze step in a little bit different way. But my mid-level and entry-level job seekers, bring me some job descriptions. I actually like to get them ahead of time so I can look for those themes, look for the main qualifications that we'll be seeking in the job. Then we're going to mine for examples. Well, first we're going to analyze those and look for the themes. And this is where if I've got a higher level person, they'll know. And I say, what are your top qualifications for these jobs? What are your best assets? And they know because they've been in that role, they've been in that field. And even if they're transitioning, if they're wanting to stay at the executive level, they're probably not making that large of a transition. And we can have that conversation of what are their main accomplishments and qualifications going to be for this role that they're targeting. Then we're mining for examples of when they've demonstrated those skills or met those qualifications. So if I've got a client that's going into HR, we're going to look at one of my former clients who is a teacher trying to go into HR. Now we're going to be really laser focused on what are HR jobs looking for and when did you do that in teaching. We're not going to talk about everything that she did in her teaching day because that's not relevant. We're going to stay laser focused to these are the qualifications they're looking for in HR. When did you do that in your teaching job? And yes, in their extracurriculars or in volunteer work, et cetera. But the more we can tie it to their experience, their professional, paid or high-level volunteer experience, the better it will be because it will be more credible. Then we're going to write those stories and accomplishments that really demonstrate that using the language of the future employer. So this is where some people will say transferrable skills. And I got to tell you, I'm not a huge fan of that term because it implies that there's this magical transference happening. And I like to use translation more because you've got to translate what you've done into the new language of the employer. And it's an active process by the job seeker. And a lot of times when we talk about transferable skills, we talk about all the fluffy stuff. Now, we know that soft skills are important to an employer, but hard skills get you the interview, soft skills get you hired. Having the hard skills plus some bonus soft skills on your resume is great. But if you don't have the hard skills, you're not going to get that interview, whether it's a human reviewing it or a scoring system, doesn't really matter. They're looking for people with the hard skills first, the skills and qualifications that the job is saying they want. And that's what we need to focus on first. And then the soft skills are the icing on the cake, right? The soft skills are the differentiators when you have those hard skills too. Now, a lot of times people don't show up as qualified for jobs because they're not able to do this work for themselves. They're not able to pull what they did away from where they did it and see how it applies in the new job. That's why they need help, right? Whether that's a friend or a family member or a resume writer, that is the main goal in a career change resume, is to pull what you did away from where and be able to tell that story in the new employer's language so that you feel like a fit. So that right away they're like, yes, this person can walk in and do this job tomorrow, because that's what everybody wants, right? And employers have gotten a little bit better at, not being so worried about that, but they're still looking for someone who has all the qualifications and can step in tomorrow. And our work is making sure that they see that right away by focusing on translating the skills and accomplishments into the right language. Yeah, they recount their history, but don't understand their strengths or their future direction. So when you don't have that focus, you can't do this. You can't do the translation. And that's why a lot of people struggle with their resume, whether they're really career changing or not, is because when you don't have focus, this piece of it becomes really challenging because you don't have an end goal. You don't have a, this is what I'm trying to aim for. So I always start in this, even with my higher level job seekers, who's your target audience? What's the biggest problem they're facing today? Why do they need someone in your position, right? What does that position do for the company, do for the customers, et cetera? And then what do you have that's the same as your competition? What do you have that is different? And then the clincher question that a lot of people forget to ask, what value do those differences offer to your target audience? So especially when someone's making a transition, what value does your work history, which may be not as applicable, what value does that have to your target audience? You're bringing this difference. We can't shove it under the rug, right? So what value does that difference have to your target audience? Because when you can connect those dots, now someone can see, they've got this kind of background that they're going to bring in and be able to add some value for me. And that's really what we're looking for here. All right, so let's jump into one of our, let's see if I can get our sample up here that I wanted to show you. Okay, so this is Rebecca Gerard, and Rebecca, obviously name changed, was one of my clients that was a teacher. She'd been a special education teacher, and she wanted to get out of special ed and get into HR and was looking at executive assistant roles. Now we started at the beginning of the career exploration phase. We went through, the what did she want to do and exploring some options. And HR or HR assistant was one of the roles that kept kind of coming back to the top as she was doing her research. So done the research, done some conversations where she was talking to people that do that kind of work, and then moving into, okay, she's ready to build a resume around that, right? So we get some HR assistant roles, we gather some roles, and we look at what are the themes, what are they talking about? And we get to like the big five, right? I like to have 3 to 5 buckets that we're really trying to fill. And it's nice, it doesn't always happen, but if you can get these kind of strengths here at the top to line up to those big buckets, then you're saying right away, kind of boom, here are the things that I have that match up with your big buckets. Very mini cover letter right here in your resume. Nice if it tells a little bit about who you are. Using some, you want to be careful of those generic phrases. Overusing that generic phrases or overused language can get you in trouble here. You can use a few of those, but you really want them to be specific to your client and specific to the job. So then I'm going to make this just a tiny bit smaller. So this person, as I said, had been a teacher and then had gone into being a tutor and caregiver in the transition. And we were thinking about, how do you communicate that in a way that relates to this type of job? And so we talked about what made sense, and we kept it short, right? So it's not totally applicable. At that point, the gap was about a year. This was a little while ago. And so we kept it short, but we didn't want to leave nothing there because that can raise a lot of eyebrows, right? Then we went down to the school district. And if this person had wanted to apply to a school district, actually would have led with the school district instead of the title. So we didn't bold the title because it's not relevant, right? But we couldn't leave it off. Sometimes I try to translate titles, but we've got to be careful about that. Putting office something or records management here or something just felt like a stretch. When we can do it, we do. Always leaving the exact title, but thinking about, is there some flexibility there? And then we could lead with the organization instead of the title. And that helps position the person as experienced in the school system, even if it's as a teacher and now they're going to go into HR. That would probably be the easiest transition for her. Remember, changing roles or changing industries, but when we try to change both, it's really difficult. So her best bet would have been to stay in the school district or a similar type of organization and transition roles from teacher to, kind of operational support or HR support within that same industry that she was in. Then we thought, okay, what are some of the transferable things that we can talk about, and how are we going to write them in their language? So we're talking about record keeping and technology, talking about meetings and deadlines and schedules, and oh my goodness, teachers have all that stuff, right? We didn't use this language, but you've got the 40 whatever, the IEPs and the plans that kids might be on, especially when they're in special education. So a lot of data and tracking and record keeping was part of her job. And then since there was an opportunity for a higher level position, not higher level, but a position at a university, and universities typically like a lot of content, we went to the expansion, always cut here, but we expanded it to talk about executive support and event planning, leadership, because she'd supervised staff in that role, outreach and communication. So really looking at what are the key things that an HR or kind of office manager might do, and how could we talk about that she had done that in her teaching role. You'll see very little in here about teaching, see very little in here about instruction or one-on-one, because those aren't the stories that matter. And that's what our goal is when we're doing these kinds of resumes, is to tell the stories that matter for the future direction. When we're telling the stories of where they've been, they're not going to match, right? We didn't want her to come across as a teacher. We wanted her to come across as a office manager, an HR assistant, someone who dealt with all of the, data that you're not supposed to, confidential data and record keeping and all of the details for her role would line up to someone having to keep track of that type of information for employees. And that's the connections that we made throughout the document. Always start with that end in mind. These are the things that they're looking for. Mind those stories very specific to the end goal. And then you've really only got those stories when you go to put together the content. When you start off with, well, what was your day and what were you doing? Then you get all this junk that we don't need. That's why I love to start with the laser focus. And I'll do that with my clients. We go through that interview process from the very beginning. Who's your audience? What's their focus? What do they care about? What's going to, kind of be the most important to them? So then my client is primed to know that those are the things we're going to be focused on. And we don't care about all this other stuff because that's where we're focused. I was just talking to a resume writer who's in our program, brought a resume for a client, and the client was a vice president level in a bank, I believe, and didn't want to put any numbers, didn't want to put any sales results or savings into the resume. And I kind of was asking the resume writer, what's going on there? No, he doesn't feel comfortable. And I said, well, what do the C-level people care about? What do the boards care about? They're going to care about those results. And when you start there, then it makes sense to the client why you're wanting to put that information into the resume. Of course, if it's appropriate and is things that can be shared, etc. But when you know what your hiring managers care about, then you can really dig in and make sure you're sharing those stories. That's what it's all about. That's what we're doing when we go to try to connect those dots. So then what do we do if someone's got a long tenure? So let's say, and I'm going to kind of switch out of career change mode. So if you have any other questions on career change resumes, go ahead and drop those into the chat. I can circle back around and answer those as we go through here. But one of the questions in the chat when I asked what people were interested in learning about today was around long tenures. And I know that we struggle with this. So I'm going to bring up a sample. I'm actually going to bring it up in Word and hope that this works. Hope that this works as we try to navigate the technology here. So this is one of our clients, fake clients that we use in our resume writing class. So if you are interested in becoming a certified resume writer, this is part of what we do, right? We teach people how to do this. And this is one of our before and after transformations. So this is the before, right? This is the before. It's got the old school heading. It's got the old school career objective. And we're not necessarily worried about formatting here, but we're looking at what's going on with this resume. So in this resume, and let me make sure that you can see this here. Excellent. Okay. So in this resume, what we've got going on is that the person was at one company for a really long time, but you don't notice that right away because the company is listed over and over again. So you got Grayson's, Grayson's, Grayson's over and over again. And although job hopping is becoming less of a problem, it really just isn't the best look for this person, for it to look like they've been here or there 1 year, 2 years. Instead, we want to make it look like they progressed within that organization, or at the very least, highlight their tenure there a little bit more. Here's the options that we have. So we can either stack all of these job titles together, or we can figure out a way to show them in that this is the overall company they work for, but here are the different places that they've been. So we're going to look at the after. Excuse me. We're going to look at the after here for Peter. And we're just going to focus on the experience section today because we've been here a little while. So here we've got where we stacked the job titles instead of showing each one. Why? Because there wasn't as much of a progression there as there was kind of go solve this problem, go solve that problem, go solve this problem. So we've got the millions in sales, which shows the progression just in the ever increasing amount of oversight that this person had. You have the furniture store pulled up here with the full date tenure. Now, if you have someone that you're worried about ageism, maybe this goes back to like the 80s or something, right? You can actually take that out and just list the positions and dates that you want to share, especially on a resume. There is no thing that says on a resume that you have to include every job and, go back to a certain amount of dates or whatever. So you don't have to have that overall date range there if that overall date range brings age into the question, right? If it goes back even to the 90s now and maybe even early 2000s, we may not want to have that overall date range there, and instead just the most recent positions with the dates for those most recent roles. So there's one little trick when you're trying to deal with ageism is you don't have to show that. You don't have to show that there. Or if you just think that long tenure isn't going to help the person, you could get rid of that date. It's a great comment, Claire. So you could get rid of that overall date range there if you think that just showing the overall tenure isn't going to help you. Got to know your industry, right? In some industries, the more traditional industries, that may be helpful. In faster moving industries, that may not be helpful. You may not want that overall date range there. You can decide. It's awesome, right? It's an awesome part of this. So let's say that instead of stacking, so we might stack when there's not really progression, there's not really difference, there's not really great accomplishments for each job, let's say. But if there is some great stories, we've got all kinds of options. So we could stack just these two. Well, actually, these ones are branch manager, right? So we could stack here and put in content. And I'm not obviously going to rewrite content, so we're just going to pretend. We could put content under each job and show the progression that way. Now I've got progression here where I was the assistant general manager. We'd have our own content stories there. Then I was a branch manager, content stories there. And before that, I was an assistant manager and unique content stories each place. Now I'm seeing that progression. I'm seeing how all of that fits together with the expansion going on in the middle. It's going to depend on the level of your client, the role, the industry, what makes the most sense, whether you stack or you expand to show that progression. What's their stories, what matters, what fits. This is why I struggle with the idea of templates. I know that, templates are really helpful for people, but everyone's decisions are so different. And the formatting is really meant to be strategically chosen to match and to highlight the best aspects of my client's career, the most applicable pieces of their career. And so be a little bit careful with templates. They're great, but you always want to think about what makes sense to best tell this client's story, because that's what we want to use formatting to do. And, and formatting can be so powerful if we think about how we want to use it to draw the eye to the best place. Now, when we're thinking about ageism too, we talked about that you could get rid of these dates out here. You could also get rid of the dates in here if you wanted to as you go further back. So we could put, early experience and make it look a little different. We could truncate these a little bit. We could put it without dates. We could put it with dates. We can take it down a notch. Sometimes people will put multiple positions. So I could put, floating manager. I think this is such a funny career. I don't know where we came up with this example years ago. I could truncate that. I could put this just easier with Voters World. And then, list just a few of those accomplishments. Sometimes people will even stack another one here. So I could put assistant manager with another company with XYZ. So I could combine those and, get rid of some of these things here if I wanted to show some certain companies or show a certain background without aging my client or without putting in all the detail. I can truncate, condense, and decide whether or not I want to include dates. Here are the things to watch out for. One, I really don't want my 60-something-year-old client only having 15 years of experience on their resume, because although I know that's kind of the tried and true, it feels a little disingenuous. It's like, well, where'd the other 20 years go? We don't need to spell out those years, but I really like using a section like this for my older job seekers so that people can see here are the most relevant with the years, and then here are some of the kind of growing up things that I've done in the background, and it helps even out that what I expect and what I see when I go to interview you. If you're doing no dates, you want to think about what that does for your client. Am I making them look older by not putting dates? If those dates are, 2005 and I leave them off, it may actually make them look older than they are. Same thing with the education. Most of the time we leave the date off, nothing wrong with that. Occasionally I'll put the date on because leaving it off makes them look older than they are. Kind of that 2000, 2010 range, someone might actually assume they're older than they are. So all of those decisions we're making with our clients, and there's no like, this is the rule. We've got to think about that person's older experience, and is there benefit, is there value to keeping it on there? Maybe because of a skill set they used or a company that they were working at that their current companies will recognize. If not, then we might leave some of those details out and what makes sense for how long they've been in the industry. So when we're thinking about our longer, tenured career strategies, it's all about relevance, making sure that we're showing the relevant technology that they know now, and making sure that we're connecting those dots to the employer. All right, so we went through some career change strategies. We had some fun looking at some samples. We looked at some long tenures. And we do have our formatting webinar coming up tomorrow. So if you're interested in joining us for that formatting webinar, get on the stick. It's tomorrow, the same time tomorrow. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to get in, write and actually get some feedback on strategic projects that have been crafted for you to help someone transition industries, help someone move up. That's what our writer training program is all about. We create these documents that are case studies. You write resumes based on the case studies, and then we give you feedback on your writing, on your strategy, and on your formatting so that you can take your writing to the next level and help clients achieve the results that they're looking for. We'll be back here on the Trend Tuesdays next Tuesday, covering the now, the new, and the next in careers. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Tuesday.